Welcome to Indiana News Desk. I'm Joe Wren. The deadline to move bills along and get them out of committee if they're going to be heard is coming up next week, so it's been busy at the Statehouse. This week, lawmakers debated allowing Sunday alcohol sales and loosening restrictions on casinos. The governor and the Department of Education have been going back and forth all week on whether the state's standardized test needs to be shortened. Our team of reporters has been following these stories. Rachel Morello from our State Impact Education team and Statehouse reporter Brandon Smith are here to break down this week's legislative news. Brandon, let's start with you. Legislators heard a bill this week called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. It's to add an extra layer of protection against religious discrimination in Indiana. How does it do that?
Well, the bill creates a test courts can use to evaluate laws and regulations. It comes in three parts. First, the religious person has to prove that their practice of religion is being infringed. And then for the law to stand, the government has to prove two things. One, that they have what's called a compelling interest for the law, and two, that what they're doing is the least restrictive means of enforcing that interest.
So what kind of situations are we talking about where supporters are saying that this might be useful?
We heard a lot of talk about fears that the government will force businesses to provide services to people they don't want to serve. So, for example, florists and bakers being forced to serve same-sex couples, or a landlord being forced to rent to an abortion clinic. There was also talk from church communities. Here's an example given by Indiana Baptist pastor Tim Overton.
I, as a pastor, offer services. It's called officiating a wedding. And there are people that want to say that if I'm going to open my services to the population at large, that I shouldn't, quote unquote, discriminate. I think everybody in this room would think that is not right for the government to compel me to lend my speech to support someone else's speech.
So, Brandon, but opponents say instead of protecting religious freedom, the bill could actually legalize discrimination.
Well, that's right, Joe. This law has been in place at the federal level and in several other states for about 2 decades now. And the ACLU says in that time, it's often been used to essentially defend acts of discrimination, such as a guidance counselor refusing to help a gay student. Here's how the head of Indiana's ACLU chapter put it.
These bills are a solution in search of a problem. This legislation is so broadly written, there may be unforeseen and harmful consequences.
So the ACLU is against it. Who else is opposing this measure?
The Indiana Chamber of Commerce spoke out against the bill. They're worried about the potential for lawsuits and also employers being forced to determine whether their employees' religious beliefs are legitimate.
All right, so moving on, Sunday alcohol sales came up again this week. A measure Representative Tom Dermody is introducing. It would legalize packaged alcohol sales on Sundays. Here's how he presented it to a House committee.
50,000 Hoosiers have signed a petition that they want Sunday sales. This is a small example that people are ready, and it's time.
And Brandon, this bill had a lot of support from grocery stores that could benefit from Sunday sales, but now they seem really worried about it. What changed?
Well, the House committee added an amendment that creates stringent new regulations for how non-liquor stores can sell alcohol. Notably, it said that all alcohol would have to be sectioned off to one part of the store, which means, for instance, grocery stores would have to put all their alcohol in one area and they couldn't have wine displays throughout the store. Proponents of that say this will help limit the exposure to children.
Well, and this issue has come up every session for the past several years. Given the changes, is it likely lawmakers are going to pass something this year?
Well, the committee passed it out 10-2, so it could go to the full House for a vote. But this issue has never had what you would call convincingly strong support in the legislature. And with the added wrinkle of the new regulations that's got folks like Kroger and Walmart fighting against it, that could be enough to halt it.
And lastly, Brandon, we just have a few seconds left. The same House committee passed a bill yesterday that would loosen the restrictions on casinos. What are they looking to do there?
They want to allow riverboats to move on land, and they want to allow the racinos to replace some of their electronic table games with tables with live dealers.
And what are the chances this will become law?
This one's a bit of a coin flip. There's supporters and opposition on both sides of the aisle.
Thanks, Brandon. And as we mentioned, it was also a busy week for education. Penn said this would be the education session, and that has certainly dominated. Rachel, it seemed like every other day, either the governor or Superintendent Ritz was having some kind of press conference over standardized tests that now we're going to double in length.
That's right, Joe. More than doubling, actually. We just got word today that the superintendent and State Board of Education have agreed to cut it by 3 hours. Here's how we got there. Department of Education announced last week that they expected the I-STEP test for 3rd through 8th graders to take about 12 hours to complete, compared to 5 hours last year. That's because the state implemented new academic standards this year, and education leaders are trying to determine which exam questions best indicate how much students have learned. Public outcry prompted Governor Mike Pence to sign an executive order on Monday, hiring 2 outside assessment experts for advice on shortening the test.
Doubling the testing time for our kids is a hardship on them, it's a hardship on families, it's a hardship on our teachers. And this is a moment that calls for decisive action.
But a Department of Education spokesman responded by saying that wasn't another option. Then, just 2 days later, the governor announced he and the superintendent had come to an agreement to try to shorten the test before the testing window opens in 2 weeks. The State Board of Education met today to talk about this and decided to cut the number of pilot questions included in half, slicing over 3 hours off the test. They're also asking the General Assembly to let them eliminate the social studies portion for 5th and 7th graders, which would chop another hour off. This agreement among the State Board hasn't really been the norm, though, which brings up the other big education news this week. The Indiana House of Representatives passed a bill that would allow board members to elect their own chair. Right now, the superintendent automatically holds that position. Remember, Superintendent Ritz is a Democrat, and all other current board members have been appointed by Republican governors. So this legislation upset many who say the House Republican majority passed the bill as a political move. But House Speaker Brian Bosma says that's not the case.
Believe me, I hesitate very much so taking action that could be interpreted as supermajorities acting against the single statewide elected official from the other party.
And that bill now heads to the Senate.